In this short video, I'm going to speak about some of the common questions that you may have in an interview for a position as a lecturer. One of the first questions could be, how do you fit into this role? Or what is it about you that fits into this university? Really, really crucial that you do your homework. Something that I made mistakes with in the past, not spending enough time reading the website for this university. The sort of things you want to be looking at is the teaching style, the teaching philosophy this university may have to engage their students. You'll want to find out the outreach plans they have as well, meaning what do they do to increase the employability of the students? What do they do to recruit students from local schools and colleges? It's also worth looking at the research activity. So I'd go on each member of staff on the website profiles, look at their research, what do they do? You could spend some time on their Twitter page as well. It gives you more information about what they're interested in. How does that link to you? And also in relation to research is links to industry. So if your research, for example, is in football, you go on the website and you see that in the past 5 years they've done research with 4 or 5 local teams, then great. It's a good talking point that you can say you've read up on that on the website. It's something that interests you as well. You will be asked about your teaching as well. Another question could be then, well, how do you engage the students in your current job? So if you're a PhD student that's been lecturing or you've been lecturing at a different university full time, what have you done to get the best out of your students? So firstly, you'll speak about your teaching philosophy, your teaching methods in class, in your Zoom classes. You can speak about, for example, the use of technology or any innovative ways you have increased the motivation or the productivity of your students. Next, it could be stuff you do outside of class as well. So your care for the students away from that class. Do you spend time helping them with applications for a job? Do you spend time looking at drafts of their work? Is there anything you do that makes you stand out compared to other candidates? And also, what about feedback? Do you collect student feedback? And if so, how do you act on this? What do you actually do when you receive the feedback? These are all very common questions that will come up in relation to your teaching as a lecturer. This is something I've tripped up on myself, so this is why I really want to put this question in. What is your research plan? Now, it might not be 5 years, it could be, well, if we employ you, what do you plan to do in the next 6 months? Or in the next 2 years, 3 years, whatever it may be. But the main things to take away from this slide are have strong ideas. And if you're hesitant or quite passive, it's a big turn off for the employer. They want someone who has a plan, who has ideas. If you say, well, I'll see how I go, I'll get this job first, and then I'll figure it out. It's going to sound crap. It has to be something that has some substance behind it. And it's even better if you can sell links you have to other universities or organizations. People love an international collaboration or a link with a big football club, big rugby club, whatever it is. So if you can sell that on top of your plan, even better. And the cherry on top is funding. So if you have a way you can actually bring money into the university too, whether that be from a sports team or a grant application that you're going for or plan to do, all of this collectively will sound really strong when you're selling your research plan. Sticking with research, they'll want to know about your papers. What's had an impact? You may have 50 papers on your CV, and that's an incredible feat, but what's been the impact of that? And employers want to know about the quality. More papers generally the better, yeah, but if you have someone that's got 10 papers but they've had high impact, and someone's got 100 papers that have had little impact, it's still down to the employer, but I think a lot of people would like to have less but with quality. So be prepared for this and be ready to sell your papers and know the statistics behind them. So you could start the question off really well and say, I did this paper, this was the impact of this and that, but you might trip up on simple questions like, well, how many times has your paper been cited in the literature? I don't know, actually. How do you know it had an impact then? Well, how many times has it been read? These sort of basic things and figures, do have them in mind when you're answering the question. And finally, how do you plan to contribute to wider activities at the university? When you're doing your PhD, you get quite caught up sometimes, like I did. You just have that tunnel vision of Teaching, research. If I nail those two, I'll do really well in the interview. But from some of my failed interviews, it's taught me there's so much more you need to think about. There's open days. You're all students. You've been to open days. You'll have met lecturers who try and sell you the university. That'll be you if you become a lecturer. You need to be able to be willing to do that as well. You might want to recruit students as well from local schools, colleges. You might look at strategies to work with industry to get your students as employable as possible in comparison to other local universities. All these things are important, but each university has a different value, let's say, on activities. So I would look at the website again, like I've mentioned earlier. What do they value? Some really value employability of students. You can argue they all will, but some are really, really big on it. So that's one example. But have a look, see what means the most at university and roll with that. So if you're doing a PhD, you're thinking about becoming a lecturer soon, or you could be years behind that and you just want to find out what you need to do in the future. Well, what I'd say to you is get experience teaching. If you're doing a PhD, get experience teaching. Really, really important that you do that. Your research could be amazing, but if you have very little experience teaching, it can be tricky to get past that barrier and getting that contract as a lecturer. If you're an undergraduate student, try and shadow a lecturer, pick their brains, just get knowledge at this point. When it comes to research, focus on the quality. If you're given the option of 20 papers or 40 papers, but those 40 have very little quality, they're just pumping out papers for the sake of it, or you have 20 papers where a good few of those have high quality, an employer is going to prefer that. You're really going to trip up if you have loads of publications to get to the interview, but none of them have any substance. And finally, see the bigger picture. When it comes to lecturing, it is more than teaching and research. Some people actually get tripped up just thinking about teaching, but universities really value your research and the impact it has and the money it can generate. But look past that. Look at the other activities like I mentioned, open days, the basic admin that you have to do on a day-to-day basis as a lecturer. That comes from looking at job adverts for lecturing roles and speaking to lecturers as well and picking their brains about this. So that was my short interview on questions for a lecturing role. If you'd like to learn more about some of the questions I've had, and God knows I've had quite a few, do ask. If you're a few years behind that, you just have a general curiosity for lecturing and you want to know some of the basic details, speak to me as well. So on Instagram at Sports Science Hacks, on Twitter at CJ Thompson 90. Okay, thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you again soon.